Hello, dear ones. I'm Mary Ellen. I'm 68 years old, and right now I want to share the most painful yet liberating story of my life. Before I start, I ask that you give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment mentioning which state of the country you're watching from. This really helps me continue to share my stories and reach more people who might need to hear these experiences. At this moment, you're looking at a woman who spent 42 years married. 42 years under the impression of having a solid family. 42 years believing she knew the man who was by her side every night. However, it turns out that my husband, my dear Paul, had been supporting a whole other family since he was 38. Another wife, other children, a different house, an entire life he built while I ironed his clothes and prepared his meals daily. Imagine my surprise when I found out. But wait, because this isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a tale of how a woman my age can reconfigure her life and reclaim every humiliation she suffered. When I discovered the truth, I didn't cry or plead. No, sirs, I began to devise the most elaborate revenge you can imagine. So if you too have felt that life has played a cruel trick on you, or if you know someone going through something similar, stay until the end, because you'll realize that it's never, ever too late to start over. Get your coffee, make yourselves comfortable, because this story is extensive, and I assure you every minute is worth it. I'm from a little town near León, Guanajuato, where I was born in 1957. Back then, women had few options. Study to become teachers, get married young, or do both if we were lucky. My family was hard-working, though modest. My father, Mr. Robert, worked in a shoe factory, while my mother, Mrs. Carmen, managed the home and sold quesadillas every weekend to help with expenses. I was the oldest of 5 siblings. Me, the eldest, followed by Robert, then Hope, Jorge, and the youngest, Lupita. Being the oldest, I had the responsibility from a very young age to help around the house and care for my younger siblings. My mother always told me, "Mary Ellen, you are destined to take care of others. That is your gift." And I believed it. What a big mistake. In my town, all the families knew each other. On Sundays after Mass, people would linger and chat in the courtyard of San Miguel Church. The men talked about work and soccer, while the women took care of their children and food. The young ones, for their part, watched each other out of the corner of their eyes, always under the watchful eye of an adult. It was a simple yet beautiful life, where everyone knew their place. I completed my studies at the local primary school and then convinced my parents to let me go to León to continue my education at the Teachers College, as I yearned to become a teacher. That was my dream. I vividly remember the day I arrived in the city in 1975, with a cardboard suitcase containing all my clothes and 200 pesos that my parents had saved by selling a piggy bank they had kept. The college was located in a large and beautiful building in the center of León. There, I met girls from other towns who, like me, wanted to improve themselves through education. I shared a room with Rose, a girl from Moreno, and we both worked in a family home to cover our expenses. On Sundays, we went to the movies to see films starring Pedro Infante or Jorge Negrete, feeling very modern as we bought popcorn and sodas. It was during my second year at the college in 1977 when I met Paul Hernandez. He was 23 years old and worked as an accountant at a transportation company. He was tall, with a dark complexion, a well-groomed mustache, and always presented himself very elegantly. He came to the college because he was the brother of Sylvia, a classmate in math. I met him one Friday afternoon. Sylvia had invited me to have tea at her house, and upon arriving I saw him reading the newspaper in the living room. He stood up with great courtesy upon seeing us enter and extended his hand. "Nice to meet you. I'm Paul Hernandez." I was very nervous and barely managed to say my name. His smile was so charming, and his pretty brown eyes looked at me intensely. That afternoon, we talked about a variety of topics. He inquired about my studies, my family, and my goals for the future. Paul shared with me that he had studied accounting at a technical school, and that his aspiration was to open his own office someday. He spoke with great confidence, as if everything was already well planned. That trust captivated me. His determination drew me in. From that moment on, he started looking for me. Every Wednesday, he would wait for me after class with some excuse. Either his sister had forgotten a book or he needed to clarify something about an assignment. But I realized he actually wanted to have a conversation with me. On Sundays, he would invite me to the movies or to stroll through the main garden in Leon. My friends told me I was very lucky, that Paul was quite attractive and seemed to have a promising future. Make the most of it, Mary Ellen, because men like him aren't found every day, Rose would say. And I, naive, thought she was right. How could I have imagined what awaited me? After 3 months of chatting and outings, Paul asked me to officially be his girlfriend. It was December 1977, and I remember it clearly because they had set up the nativity scene in the main garden, and the whole city smelled of punch and buñuelos. He took me to dinner at an elegant restaurant called Los Compadres. There, after dessert, he took my hand and said, "Mary Ellen, I want you to be my girlfriend. I will always take care of you." I accepted, but I explained that I needed to finish my studies first. He assured me it was no problem, that he would wait for me, and that he would even help me financially so I could fully focus on school. His words resonated in my ears like a heavenly melody. I had finally found a man who supported my aspirations of becoming a teacher. Throughout 1978, we had a very serious relationship. He would come to see me every weekend, always bringing me flowers or chocolates. He met my parents, who quickly grew fond of him. My dad would say, "That young man is hardworking and responsible. Mary Ellen, he will make you happy." My mom added that he was very polite and seemed to come from a good family. However, looking back, I can remember some details that at the time didn't seem suspicious but should have made me wary. For instance, I never met his parents. He always had an excuse, like they lived too far away, that they were sick, or that it wasn't a good time. Also, I noticed that sometimes he would disappear for several days without offering much explanation. "I have a lot of work," he told me, "but soon things will calm down." Once, it must have been in August 1978, I found a photo of a little girl in his wallet. When I asked him who she was, he became quite nervous and replied that she was his niece, the daughter of a brother who lived up north. I found it strange since he had never mentioned that brother, but I shrugged it off. How naive I was. That girl was his first child with his other family. I graduated from normal school in July 1979 and immediately got a job as a primary school teacher in a school in the municipality of San Francisco del Rincon. It was a position I really enjoyed. Working with children had always been my true calling. I earned little, but it was honest income, and I took pride in having my own salary. Paul and I had been talking about marriage since the beginning of that year. He was already 25, and I was 22, so our families felt it was the right time for us to get married. In October 1979, he formally asked for my hand from my parents at a very formal dinner at home. He arrived with a huge bouquet of red roses and an engagement ring he bought at the most luxurious jewelry store in Leon. "Don Robert, Doña Carmen," he said to my parents, "I come to ask for Mary Ellen's hand because I love her and want to start a family with her." My father asked him about his income, his housing plans, and his ability to support a family. Paul answered everything with great confidence. He had savings, planned to rent a nice house in Leon, and would soon open his own accounting office. We got married on February 14th, 1980 at the San Miguel Church in my hometown. It was a beautiful, though simple wedding. I wore the wedding dress that my cousin Letitia had used, which my mom adjusted to fit me perfectly. Paul looked very handsome in his black suit and silver tie. In the photos I still keep, he looks very smiley and deeply in love. The celebration took place in the yard of my parents' house. We set up long tables with white tablecloths. My Aunt Hope took care of the banquet. Mole poblano, red rice, charro beans, and freshly made tortillas. The town band played until 3 in the morning. It was a magical night when I felt like the happiest woman in the world. During our honeymoon, we went to Guadalajara for 3 days. We stayed at a downtown hotel called Colonial and visited the cathedral, the Golado Theater, and the San Juan de Dios market. Paul was very attentive to me. He bought me everything I wanted and took photos of me everywhere we went. "You'll see that we will be very happy," he told me while hugging me. When we returned, we already had a home ready that Paul had rented in the Jardins de Leon neighborhood. It was small but charming, with 2 bedrooms, a living room, dining room, kitchen, and a backyard where I placed pots with geraniums and mint. I dedicated myself to decorating it with care. I bought floral curtains, used rugs woven by my mom, and hung up some wedding photos. The first months of marriage felt like a dream. I worked at my school from Monday to Friday, while Paul was employed at a transportation company. In the evenings, we shared dinner and talked about our day. On weekends, it was common for us to visit our families or go to the movies. I would get up early to prepare breakfast for him and made his lunch for him to take. On Fridays, Paul would come home with flowers and help me with the chores. In October 1980, I became pregnant with my first child. I remember those months as the happiest of my life, and Paul was full of excitement. He would often caress my belly and talk to the baby, saying, "I can't wait to meet you, little one." We bought the crib, clothes, and all the necessary preparations. He insisted that it should be a boy, and we would name him Paul, just like him. Robert was born on June 15, 1981. The birth was complicated. I was in labor for 18 hours at the General Hospital of Leon, but when I finally held him in my arms, all the suffering faded away. He was a beautiful, chubby, rosy baby with his father's brown eyes. Paul couldn't hold back his tears of happiness when he saw him and said to me, "Thank you, my love, for giving me the most beautiful child in the world." I took a leave of absence from school to care for Robert during his first months. Paul worked extra hours to make up for my lost salary and never complained. On the contrary, he told me it was essential for me to be with the baby. "The first years are crucial," he insisted. "Afterward, you can go back to work." When Robert turned 1, I returned to teaching. I left the baby in the care of my mother-in-law, Doña Eulalia, who lived close to us. She was an exceptional woman who loved her grandson dearly. On Fridays, she helped me with the household chores so I could rest over the weekend. In 1983, my second daughter, Hope, was born, and in 1985, the third, Carmen. With 3 children, the house filled with life and joy, but also with expenses and responsibilities. Paul had to find extra work on weekends, managing the accounting for small shops and doing tax returns. He was always a very hard-working man. That's something I recognize. During those times, I was completely happy. I had my job, my children, and my husband by my side. On Sundays, we would take the kids to the park, enjoy ice cream, and buy them balloons. In the afternoons, when the little ones were resting, Paul and I would talk about our dreams. We aspired to own a house, send the kids to good schools, and maybe travel when they were older. However, looking back now, I realized that during those years, the first strange signs began to appear, which I didn't want to acknowledge. Paul traveled frequently for work. He would tell me he had been assigned to do an audit in Aguascalientes. He would say, "Oh, I have to go to Guadalajara to check some accounts." He was away 2 or 3 days each month, always on weekdays. One time I found a restaurant receipt from Morelia in his pants, dated on a day when he was supposedly working in Leon. When I asked him about it, he assured me it was a mistake on the clerk's part and that he had never been to Morelia. I believed him because why would I doubt my husband? Besides, he began to be more reserved with his money. He used to hand me the household budget without question, but now he would say that things were too expensive and that he needed to be more cautious with spending. "The country's economic situation is complicated," he explained to me. "We need to save for the kids' future." In 1987, when Robert was 6 years old, Hope was 4, and Carmen was 2, Paul announced that he was finally going to set up his own accounting firm. "I've saved enough money," he told me excitedly. I'm going to rent an office in downtown Lyon and start working independently. I felt very happy because I knew that had been his dream since I met him. However, I was surprised that he had saved so much money without me knowing. When I asked where he came from, he told me he had been saving little by little from his side jobs and that he had applied for a loan at the bank. "Don't worry about that," he said. "The important thing is that we will finally have our own business." The office turned out really beautiful. He rented 2 offices in a building on Madero Avenue, bought desks, electric typewriters, and filing cabinets. He had a sign made that said Hernandez Accounting Office in gold letters. During the inauguration, we organized a small gathering with family and friends. My parents came from the village, and his siblings also attended. We all wished him great success. During the first few months, the business prospered considerably. Paul managed to attract clients quickly, including stores, workshops, and small businesses that needed to keep their accounting up to date. He hired a secretary, Miss Lucia, a very capable young woman who had studied at a commercial academy. Thanks to the economic improvement, we were able to move to a bigger house in the San Felipe neighborhood. It had 4 rooms, 2 bathrooms, and a garage for the car we had just acquired, a blue 1987 Subaru that was my pride. The kids enjoyed having more space to play, and I finally had a spacious kitchen where I could host families. However, with the rise of the office, Paul began to spend a lot more time away from home. "I need to personally attend to the clients," he explained to me. "If I want the business to grow, I can't cut corners on service." He would return later and later, often after 9 p.m. when the kids were already asleep. He also started working on weekends. "Saturdays are when I can do the audits because the businesses are closed," he would tell me. He would leave early in the morning and return in the afternoon. I stayed home alone with the kids, but I didn't complain because I understood he was building our future. During that time, a certain Patricia Morrison began to appear in his life. According to Paul, she was an accountant he had met in a tax update course who was assisting him with some important clients that required specialized work. "She is very efficient in her work," he told me, "and thanks to her, we will be able to move forward much faster." At first, Patricia was just a name I mentioned from time to time. She had told me about new tax regulations, or that she had a client looking for auditing services. But gradually, she became part of our conversations more frequently and personally. One day, she announced to me that Patricia would be joining the firm as a partner. "We're going to merge our businesses," she explained. "She has experience in areas where I'm not as skilled, and together we'll offer more comprehensive services." I asked her if she had known Patricia for a long time, and she replied that no, they had just become friends a few months prior. The first time I saw Patricia was at the firm's year-end celebration in December 1988. She was a woman around 30 years old, slender, with gray hair, dressed very elegantly in a wine-colored suit. She projected sophistication and confidence. When Paul introduced us, she greeted me kindly, but I noticed she was observing me closely, as if she were evaluating me. During the party, I noticed that Patricia and Paul were chatting quite a bit together in a way that seemed too familiar to be just colleagues. They laughed at jokes I couldn't understand and whispered secrets to each other. He poured her punch without her asking. When I mentioned this to Paul that night, he got upset with me. "How can you think like that, Mary Ellen?" he reprimanded. "Patricia is just my partner, nothing more. If we're going to work together, we need good communication. I don't like that you think poorly of my professional relationships." I felt guilty for doubting him and apologized, but inside, something in me was uneasy. A woman can sense when another woman is interested in her partner. It's a kind of instinct we have. And I sensed that Patricia looked at Paul in a way that went beyond the professional. Throughout 1989, Paul's behavior changed significantly. He began to pay much more attention to his appearance. He bought new clothes, wore expensive cologne, and groomed his mustache at a nice salon downtown. "I need to make a good impression," he would say every time he mentioned these changes. Important clients expect their accountants to look professional. Furthermore, he started coming home even later. "Patricia and I are working on a very important project," he explained to me. "It's a business that will generate excellent income for us, but it requires a lot of dedication." Many nights, I would have dinner alone after putting the kids to bed, often falling asleep waiting for him. Work trips became more common. One day in Aguascalientes or Guadalajara was no longer enough. Now it was 3 to 4 day trips to more distant cities. "We have clients all over the Bajío," Patricia explained to me, "and it's necessary for us to visit them in person to maintain the accounts." When I asked her why I had to travel with her, she replied that it was more efficient to divide the work, allowing them to attend to more clients in less time. Additionally, she added, she has her own car, so we can share the gas expenses. One afternoon in March 1990, I decided to go to the office unannounced because I needed to ask Paul for money for a medical emergency for Carmen, who had come down with tonsillitis. When I arrived, the secretary informed me that Paul was not there and that he had gone out with Licenciada Patricia for a client meeting. I waited in the office until they returned an hour later. When they came in, they were laughing about something, looking very relaxed and comfortable. Paul was surprised to see me there, while Patricia immediately took on a serious demeanor. "What are you doing here?" Paul asked me, and I noticed a hint of irritation in his tone. I explained the situation with Carmen, and he gave me the money without any issues. However, during the time I stayed there, I sensed a strange tension in the air. Patricia retreated to her office and closed the door, as if she wanted to avoid interacting with me. Paul seemed quite serious, lacking the affection he usually showed me. That night, while we were in bed, I asked him if there was something he needed to tell me about Patricia. He turned towards me and replied, "Mary Ellen, here we go again. I repeat, she's my business partner. If you keep making those assumptions, you're putting our marriage at risk." However, the seed of doubt was already planted in my mind. I began to pay attention to details I had previously overlooked. For example, on occasions, he would come home smelling of women's perfume on his clothes. When I asked him about it, he said he had been in offices where there was a lot of smoking and that he used perfume to mask the smell. During the year 1990, my suspicions started to take shape. One afternoon, while washing Paul's clothes, I found a handwritten note in the pocket of his shirt that said, "My love, I can't wait to see you tomorrow." My heart sank. When he arrived that night, I showed him the note and asked what it meant. He seemed very uneasy and started to stammer. "It's just a thank you note from a client," he explained. Patricia helped her with a complicated tax problem, and she wrote that thank you note. I told him I didn't think it sounded very professional, but he insisted I was misunderstanding the situation. "Mary Ellen," he said, taking my hands, "you are the love of my life, the mother of my children. How could you even think that I would do something like that? It hurts me so much that you don't trust me after all these years together." I wanted to believe him with all my heart. We had been married for 10 years and had 3 wonderful children. We had built a life together, but something inside me was telling me that things weren't right. I began to pay more attention to his schedule. I noticed he always had important meetings on the same days of the week, that his work trips coincided with the times when Patricia was also absent from the office, that he came home hungry, as if he hadn't eaten dinner. But when I asked him, he told me he had eaten at some restaurant with clients. One night in April, while going over household expenses, I realized that Paul had been withdrawing extra money from the bank account. When I asked him why, he told me he had to cover some office expenses that would be reimbursed later, but the amount was excessive, almost 3,000 pesos, much more than what normal office expenses would be. I also started to notice that he showed less interest in being with me and the kids. Before, when he got home from work, he would play with Robert, Hope, and Carmen. He would help them with their homework. We had dinner together talking about our day, but now he would come home exhausted, sit down to watch TV, and hardly pay attention to us. In the intimacy of the bedroom, things had also changed. We used to be very affectionate, hugging and chatting before going to sleep. But he started coming home so late that by the time I was already asleep, he would wake up before me. Every time I tried to get close, he always had an excuse. He was too tired. He had work worries. He wasn't feeling well. In May 1990, I decided to do something I had never done in my marriage: spy on my husband. One afternoon, instead of heading straight home after school, I drove to the building where his office was and waited in the car to see what time Paul would leave. I saw him come out at 6 p.m. with Patricia. They got into his red Jetta together and drove off toward downtown. I followed them, keeping my distance. They stopped at a restaurant called La Cabana, a fancy place I had never been to since it was quite expensive. I waited in the parking lot until they came out 2 hours later. They were holding hands. When they reached the car, he kissed her on the lips before she got in. After that, they each left separately. That night, I got home before Paul and acted as if nothing had happened. When he arrived, I asked him how his day at work had been. "Good," he replied. "I had meetings all day. I'm very tired." He didn't mention anything about dinner with Patricia. The next day, I confronted my sister Hope, who lived in Leon and sometimes passed through downtown. I asked her if she had ever seen Paul around there. She said yes. She had seen him several times with an elegant woman in restaurants or walking along Madero Avenue. "I thought she was just a client," she added, "but they looked quite close." That conversation with my sister was like a bucket of cold water. I could no longer fool myself into thinking it was just my imagination. My husband was being unfaithful to me, and he had probably been doing it for a long time. But I still didn't understand the real magnitude of the betrayal. I thought it was just a fling, a passing slip that we might get over with couples therapy or a good conversation. I never imagined that what I was experiencing was just the tip of the iceberg of a much bigger and more painful lie. In the following months, I continued to collect evidence without Paul noticing. I checked his pockets, documents, and paid attention to his phone conversations. I found more notes, receipts for expensive gifts, hotel bills in cities where he supposedly had gone for work alone. On one occasion, I discovered a photo of Patricia in a swimsuit in his wallet on what seemed to be a beach. When I asked him, he said he had given it to her as a joke after a vacation she had taken with her family. But I knew he was lying. No one gives personal photos to a coworker. In December 1990, during the Christmas celebration at the office, I started paying closer attention to how Paul and Patricia interacted. They acted like a couple. He would move her chair, pour her drink, and caress her hand when he thought no one was watching. She looked stunning in a beautiful red dress and a pearl necklace that seemed very expensive. When I asked Paul where he had gotten the money for such elegant jewelry, he replied that it was probably a gift from her family. That night when I got home, we had our first major argument about Patricia. I could no longer ignore what was happening. I told Paul I knew he was lying to me about that woman. I was convinced there was something between them that went beyond a work relationship. Paul got furious. He yelled at me that he was tired of my jealousy. "Patricia is my colleague. If you can't accept that I have to work with other people, then the problem is you, not me." That confrontation dragged on until 3 in the morning. I was crying and begging him to tell me the truth. If there was something going on with Patricia, I would prefer him to admit it directly so we could find a solution together. However, he continued to deny everything, and in the end he told me that if after so many years of marriage I couldn't trust him, then maybe we weren't compatible. The next day I acted as if nothing had happened, but inside I was shattered. My marriage was falling apart, and I didn't know where to turn. I had 3 small children, a job I enjoyed, even though it wasn't lucrative. and my whole life had been built around a relationship that was turning into a lie. I remember 1991 as the hardest year I had lived up to that point. Paul's lies had become so obvious that he didn't even bother to hide them anymore. He came home smelling of women's perfume, and I found lipstick marks on the collars of his shirts. He would answer calls on the phone and step out to the patio to talk so I couldn't hear. The kids started to realize that something was wrong. Robert, who was already 10 years old, asked me why his dad had stopped playing soccer with him on Sundays. Hope, who was 9, told me she heard Paul speaking softly on the phone at night. Carmen, the youngest at 6, started throwing tantrums because she needed more attention from her dad. I tried to maintain normalcy at home, but I lived in a constant state of tension. I wasn't sleeping well. I had lost my appetite. At school, the teachers asked me if I was okay. As they could see, I looked very worn out. My parents also became concerned when they visited us in January. "Mija," my mother told me alone in the kitchen, "you seem very sad. Is everything okay with Paul?" I didn't want to share anything with her because I knew it would distress her, but I think she sensed that things weren't going well. In February 1991, I decided to hire a detective. It hurt me immensely to have to go to that extent, but I needed to know the complete truth to make a decision about my future. The detective, Mr. Martinez, had a small office near downtown Leon. I explained my entire situation to him, and he told me that these cases were quite common. "Ma'am," he said, "most wives who come here already know the truth deep down. They just seek confirmation to act." He asked for photos of Paul and Patricia, as well as their schedules and the places where I had seen them together. Mr. Martinez spent a month following Paul and Patricia and provided me with a detailed report with photos, dates, and times. It was more serious than I had imagined. They were not only having an affair, but they were practically living like a married couple in the absence of their respective families. In the pictures, I saw them entering and leaving hotels, dining at romantic restaurants, shopping together in luxury clothing stores, and kissing in the car. There was one image where she was wearing the pearl necklace I recognized from the Christmas party. However, the photo that affected me the most was one where they were walking hand in hand in a park, accompanied by 2 small children I didn't know. When I asked the detective about those children, he informed me that he had followed Patricia to a house in the Jardin de Jerez neighborhood, where she lived with those 2 children. From what I was able to find out, the detective explained that Mrs. Patricia Morrison lived there with 2 children, a girl about 10 years old and a boy of 8. Her husband, Paul Hernandez, visited regularly and spent the night at her house at least 3 times a week. The news left me in shock. Her husband? Yes, the detective reassured me. According to my investigations, Mr. Paul Hernandez legally married Mrs. Patricia Morrison in August 1988 at the civil registry in Leon. Legally, he was bigamous. I felt like my world was collapsing. Not only was he betraying me with another woman, but he had also married her, and they had children. Our entire married life had been a farce. While I thought we were a happy family, he was secretly building another family. I asked the detective to carry out a deeper investigation. A week later, he handed me information that completely shattered me. Patricia and Paul had met in 1987, not in 1988, as he had indicated. She had given birth to their first child in February 1988, just 3 months after our wedding. The girl was born in July 1989. "Ma'am," said Attorney Martinez, "based on the dates I have, your husband started the relationship with the other woman when you were pregnant with your daughter Carmen. He legally married her when Carmen was just 3 years old. This meant that during the pregnancies of Hope and Carmen, while I believed we were a united family, Paul was already living a double life. The work trips, the late arrivals, the missing money, everything suddenly had a reason. He was supporting 2 families simultaneously. That night, when Paul came home, I waited for him in the living room with the detective's report on the table. Upon seeing the documents and photographs, he went pale. Mary Ellen said to me, "I can explain everything." "Explain what?" I shouted at him. "Do you have another wife, other children? For 13 years you have been deceiving me while I raised our children. You were building another family?" He sat down in the armchair and put his head in his hands. "It's very complicated," he said. I didn't mean for things to end up like this. At that moment, I felt such deep anger that I almost hit him. However, I held back because I knew the children were sleeping in their rooms and I didn't want them to hear. "I want you to leave this house," I said in a voice I didn't recognize. "I want you to go right now and not come back until we decide what we're going to do." Paul got up and went to gather some things from the bedroom. Before leaving, he said to me, "Mary Ellen, I know what I did was terrible, but you and the kids have always been very important to me. Can we fix this?" I didn't answer him. "There's nothing to fix anymore. What you did is unforgivable." Once he was gone, I sat down in the living room and cried like I had never before. Not just because of the betrayal, but for all the years I wasted living a lie, for every time I doubted my intuition, for all those moments I believed his words, even though my heart knew something was wrong. But amid that suffering, I felt something unexpected, a strange sense of relief. I finally knew the truth. I could finally put an end to the uncertainty that had tormented me for so long, and it was in that moment that I made the most significant decision of my life. I wasn't going to let myself be dragged down by this situation. I was going to take control of my existence and act cunningly to get my revenge in the most intelligent and devastating way I could conceive. The days that followed after Paul left the house were the most complicated I had ever faced. I had to explain to my children why Dad no longer slept at home. Robert, who was 10, began to sense that something serious had happened. Hope and Carmen, although younger, also noticed the tension. I told them that their father and I were having some problems and that we needed some time apart to think. I preferred not to reveal the whole truth as they were too young to understand something so complex. Robert asked me if we were going to get a divorce, and I told him that we didn't know yet what would happen. During that week, Paul called me several times asking to talk. He told me he wanted to explain how things had developed, that there were aspects I didn't understand, but I wasn't ready to listen to him. I needed time to process everything I had discovered and to plan my next steps. My sister Hope stayed with me during those days to help me with the kids and provide emotional support. She was furious with Paul. "How could he do this to you?" she said to me. "After so many years of marriage, after everything you sacrificed for him and for the family, a week after he left, Paul came to the house while the kids were at school. He arrived feeling very remorseful, carrying flowers and wearing a sad expression that stirred my compassion. He sat in the living room and shared his version of the events. "Patricia and I met in 1987, he explained. "At first, we were just friends, but over time we fell in love. When she proposed to me, I was already emotionally committed to her. But I didn't know how to leave you. I was afraid of hurting you and the kids. So you decided to maintain 2 families to avoid hurting anyone," I responded sarcastically. "I know it might seem absurd," he admitted. But at that moment, it felt like the most viable solution. I thought I could make both families happy without anyone suffering. I realized that was impossible when it was already too late. He explained that with Patricia, he had 2 children, Monica, who was 10, and Paul Jr., who was 8, living in a house in Jardin de Jerez, which he had bought in his name. Every week he provided them with money for their expenses, and Patricia had known from the very beginning that he was married to me. "Did Patricia know you had a wife?" I asked him, incredulous. "Yes," he confessed, looking down. "She was aware from the start. In fact, that's why she accepted that we married only civilly, because she understood that the religious marriage was with you." That revelation struck me like another dagger to my heart. Not only had my husband betrayed me, but the other woman had been a willing accomplice in that betrayal all those years. They had been laughing behind my back, organizing their lives while I raised my children, believing I had a stable family. "So what do you want now?" I asked him. "I want you to forgive me," he replied. "I want us to find a way to be together again. I'm willing to leave Patricia if you give me another chance." I stared at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw Paul for who he really was, a selfish, lying, and cowardly man who had been manipulating the lives of 2 women and 5 children for years. A man who was now proposing to leave his other family as if it were a sacrifice he was making for me. I didn't tell him that I no longer wanted anything to do with him. What he did is unforgivable, and there's no way to save this marriage. Paul started to cry and begged me to reconsider my decision. He told me that without me and the kids, his life felt meaningless, that he had made the biggest mistake of his life, and that he was willing to do whatever it took to regain my trust. But I had already made my decision. I wasn't just going to offer forgiveness. I was also going to ensure he faced the consequences for the years of lies and humiliation he had put me through. During the week I spent alone, I meticulously planned my revenge. "Paul," I said calmly, "you can come see the kids whenever you want, but you and I have nothing left to discuss. I will be filing for divorce, and we will divide the assets as stipulated by law." That afternoon, he left the house thinking I was a wounded woman who only wanted a divorce to take half of his belongings. He had no idea what I was really plotting. I decided that if he had been able to live a double life for years, I could also plan my revenge for months without him noticing. The idea that formed in my mind was simple but devastating. I planned to use his own arrogance and tendency to lie against him. Over time, I would make him provide me with all the tools necessary to ruin the false life he had built with Patricia, but in such a subtle way that he wouldn't realize it until it was too late. The first phase of the plan was to convince him that I was willing to attempt reconciliation, as long as he proved that he had truly ended his relationship with Patricia. This would allow me access to information about his other family and continue gathering evidence without raising suspicion. The second part of the plan involved obtaining legal evidence of the bigamy and misappropriation of funds he had been committing from the office to support both families. With that evidence, not only could I gain the upper hand in the divorce, but I would also get him into serious legal trouble. And the third stage, the most rewarding, would be to reveal everything to the public in such a way that all his family, friends, clients, and the community would know exactly what kind of person he truly was. However, for the plan to succeed, I needed to be extremely patient and cunning. I had to make him believe that I was considering forgiving him, while in reality, I was gathering all the necessary information for his complete destruction. A week after our conversation, I called him. "Paul," I said, "I've been reflecting on what you told me. I think we should strive to save our marriage, but I need you to show me that you have truly closed the chapter with Patricia." He seemed very happy. "Of course, my love," he replied. "I'm done with her. I am willing to do whatever it takes for us to trust each other again." "All right," I responded. "However, I want proof. I want to know clearly how you ended your relationship with her, where her children are living now, and how you're going to resolve the situation with the house. If you truly want us back together, you can't hide anything from me anymore." Thus began the information gathering stage for my revenge. Paul, thinking he was winning back his family, started sharing all the details about his life with Patricia that I needed to orchestrate his downfall. Over the next 6 months, from April to October 1991, I became the most understanding and indulgent wife in the world. Every time Paul shared something related to his situation with Patricia, I listened with great patience, asking questions that seemed to stem from my desire to repair our marriage, but were actually designed to gather information. "How did you tell Patricia that you were no longer together?" I asked one evening during dinner. I explained to him that my bond with him was what mattered most. He replied that we had been together longer and that we had 3 children. She understood, although of course she was pretty sad. "And what will happen with Monica and Paul Jr.?" I asked. They can't be left without a father. I will still see them, he explained, but no longer as Patricia's partner, only as their father. I will visit them once a week and send them money for their needs. Little by little, I pieced together the puzzle of his divided life. I discovered that the house with gardens in Jerez was in Patricia's name, although he had made the down payment and was covering the mortgage. Additionally, he had a separate bank account where he deposited money for the family's expenses, and he had been diverting funds from the practice for years to maintain his two homes. He also shared details about his daily life with Patricia that helped me understand how they managed to hide the truth for so long. For example, she told her neighbors that her husband worked in another city and only came home on weekends, and that the children had the last name Hernandez Morales, making the school believe their parents were separated. "Do the kids know you have another family?" I asked her one night. "Monica knows I have other children," she confessed. But Paul Jr. doesn't. Patricia and I decided he was too young to understand the situation. Every time she told me something like that, I had to act like I was trying to understand and forgive, when in reality, I was furious at how carelessly they handled a situation that destroyed my life and my children's lives. During those months, I also began to investigate the legal status of our marriage. I hired a divorce lawyer, Mr. Rodriguez, to whom I explained everything that had happened. He confirmed that Paul had indeed committed bigamy, a federal offense, and that I was entitled not only to a divorce but also to sue for damages. "Ma'am, Mr. Rodriguez explained to me, you have a very solid case. With the evidence you have, you can obtain the divorce with a very high chance of winning, in addition to custody of the children, child support, half of the assets acquired during the marriage, and of course you have the option to file a claim for emotional damages." He also suggested that I hire a forensic accountant who could investigate the finances of the practice and document the misappropriation of funds that Paul had been engaging in. If it is proven that he used resources from the family business to support his other family, he told me, you can recover all that money along with interest. Meanwhile, at home, I continued the facade that we were trying to repair our marriage. Paul returned to sleep at home, but I set certain conditions. I needed to be informed of his whereabouts at all times. He had to give me access to his bank accounts and could have no contact with Patricia except to see the kids once a week. He accepted all my conditions because he believed it was his only chance to save our marriage. He didn't realize that every piece of information he provided me, every document he showed me, and every detail he shared was being used to build the strongest possible legal case against him. In August 1991, he took me to visit the house where Patricia and the kids had lived. "I want you to see that there's nothing between us anymore," he said to me. The house was empty because Patricia had moved in with her sister. It was a lovely two-story house with a garden and space for 2 cars, much larger and fancier than ours. Upon entering and seeing the rooms that had belonged to Monica and Paul Jr., with their toys still scattered and their drawings on the walls, I felt a mix of pain and anger that I could barely contain. "How much did you pay for this house?" I asked him. "The down payment was 80,000 pesos, he replied, "and the mortgage is this much per month." That amount represented more than half of our family income. It meant that for years he had been using money that should have gone to improving the lives of his legitimate children to support another family. Money that could have been used to take us on vacations, buy new clothes for the kids, or fix our house. He also showed me bank statements that were in Patricia's name. For 5 years, he had been depositing between 100 and 2,000 pesos a month into that account, funds that came directly from the profits of his business and that he reported as operating expenses. Patricia didn't work. I asked him why, and he answered that someone had to take care of the kids. Moreover, he claimed that I earned enough to support both families. What Paul didn't understand was that every time he showed me a document, I took the chance to make a photocopy when he wasn't paying attention. Whenever he mentioned a date or a significant event, I jotted it down in a notebook I kept hidden at school. I was creating a complete file of his double life, which I would later use against him. In September, my lawyer informed me that he already had enough evidence to proceed with the divorce and the corresponding lawsuits. The forensic accountant had completed his investigation and documented more than 180,000 pesos in embezzled funds over the past 5 years. "Ma'am," Attorney Rodriguez said to me, "with the evidence we have, your ex-husband could face prison for bigamy and fraud. Moreover, you have the possibility of receiving substantial financial compensation." However, I didn't just want to win the divorce and financial compensation. I craved something more. I wanted everyone who knew us to know exactly what kind of man Paul Hernandez was. I wanted his clients, his family, his friends, the entire community of Leon to be aware that he had been living a lie for years. That's when the perfect idea for the final stage of my revenge struck me. I was going to organize a large family gathering to announce that Paul and I had decided to renew our marriage vows to celebrate our reconciliation. I planned to invite all his family, mine, his closest clients, the parents of the students at the school where I worked, and also the neighbors. It would be a monumental celebration where everyone would be present, and during that party, in front of all the attendees, I would reveal the complete truth about his secret life. The plan was flawless, since Paul wouldn't be able to refuse the proposal to renew our vows without raising suspicions. On the contrary, he would have to appear excited to celebrate our renewed love. There would be no way for him to evade the trap I had set. In October of that year, I presented the idea to him. "Paul," I said one night after dinner, "I've been thinking that we should do something special to commemorate that we've overcome this crisis. How about we renew our marriage vows and invite the whole family?" He seemed very excited. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he replied while hugging me. "It will be a way to show everyone that our love is stronger than any challenge." "Exactly," I answered with a smile. "It will be a celebration that no one will ever forget." And I was right. It was going to be a celebration that nobody would forget, though not for the reasons he thought. The following 2 months, November and December of 1991, were filled with intense preparation for what would be the most gratifying moment of my life. While Paul thought we were organizing a party to celebrate our renewed love, I was meticulously planning his public humiliation. The chosen date was February 14th, 1992, exactly 12 years after our original wedding. I mentioned to Paul that it was very symbolic for us to renew our vows on Valentine's Day and on the anniversary of our union. He completely agreed and even showed enthusiasm for the idea. We rented the banquet hall at the Leon Social Club, a sophisticated venue with a capacity for 200 people. I told Paul I wanted to invite a large number of people because it was essential for everyone to know we had overcome our marital issues. "I want it to be a grand celebration," I said, "so everyone can witness how happy we are together." I carefully and personally prepared the guest list. I included all of Paul's family, his parents, siblings, uncles, cousins, as well as my entire family, my parents, siblings, aunts, along with all the important clients from the accounting firm, the teachers from the school where I worked, the neighbors from our neighborhood, and the parents of our daughter's classmates. However, the most significant invitation I sent was one Paul never knew about, a personal invitation to Patricia Morrison. I sent it to her new address, where she lived with her sister after the supposed breakup with Paul. In the card, I wrote, "Dear Patricia, I would like to extend a cordial invitation to the renewal of marriage vows of Paul Hernandez and Mary Ellen Garcia, which will take place on February 14th at the Leon Social Club. We hope to have your presence at this very significant occasion for our family." I also decided to hire the most prestigious photographer in Leon to capture every moment of the event. I explained that I wanted photos from the arrival of the first guests until the last one left. It's a very special event, I told him, and I want it to be fully documented. Additionally, I organized a music group, ordered a 3-tier cake, requested elaborate floral arrangements, and took care of every detail of the party to ensure it was the most elegant one we had ever had. Paul was surprised by all the costs. However, I mentioned that it was worth investing in a celebration that symbolized the beginning of a new phase in our married life. During those weeks, I also finished preparing all the legal documentation. My lawyer had the divorce papers ready, along with the claims for bigamy and fraud, as well as the liens on Paul's assets. We had agreed that all the legal documents would be submitted on Monday, February 17th, 3 days after the party. The forensic accountant completed his report with compelling evidence that Paul had diverted over 200,000 pesos from the firm over 6 years to support his second family. We had copies of bank statements, invoices, contracts, and a thorough analysis of all the irregular financial transactions. I also prepared a very special presentation for the party. I told Paul that I wanted to give a speech during dinner to thank all the guests for joining us at such a significant moment. I wanted to share our journey as a couple, explaining the obstacles we have overcome and our plans for the future. What I omitted was that I had created a very special photo album to show during my speech. An album that contained all the photographs the private detective had taken of Paul and Patricia together. Pictures of them kissing, hugging, entering hotels, and walking with their 2 children. It also included copies of documents like Paul and Patricia's civil marriage certificate, the statements from the secret bank account, as well as the invoices from the House of Gardens in Jerez. I made copies of the album for each table of guests so that each family could take home a copy to show whomever they wished. A week before the party, Paul asked me if Patricia had confirmed her attendance. I responded with a lie, saying that I hadn't received a response. She probably won't come, I told him. It must be uncomfortable for her to attend the celebration of our marriage. However, I knew that Patricia would show up because a few days earlier I had contacted her by phone, pretending to be the assistant of the social club. I assured her that it was crucial for her to come, as something very significant related to Paul would be revealed. On the night of February 13th, while Paul adjusted the new suit he had bought for the occasion, I reviewed every aspect of my strategy one last time. The photo album was ready, the legal documents prepared, and the invitations had been sent out. The photographer had specific instructions on which moments to capture. "Are you nervous?" Paul asked me as he put on his tie. "A little," I replied with a smile. "But it's nervous excitement. Tomorrow will be a day we'll never forget." "You're right," he affirmed, kissing me on the forehead. "It will be the day that marks the beginning of our new life together." That night, I could barely sleep, not from anxiety, but from excitement. After 9 months of meticulously planning every detail, the time had come to avenge all the humiliations, the lies, and all the lost years spent living in deception. At dawn on February 14th, 1992, the sky was clear and the sun shone as if it were announcing that it would be a perfect day. I woke up early, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat in the kitchen mentally reviewing all the details of what would unfold that day. At 10 in the morning, the stylist I had hired arrived to do my hair and makeup. I had bought a new dress in an elegant royal blue shade, which wasn't overly formal, paired with high-heeled shoes that made me feel taller and more confident. I wanted to look beautiful and radiant on my special day. Paul woke up in a great mood, singing in the shower as he got ready with care. He wore a navy blue suit that we had specifically chosen for the occasion, a crisp white shirt, and the silver tie I had given him on our anniversary the previous year. He looked incredibly handsome, and for a moment I felt a pang of sadness for all that we had lost. The kids were also excited. Robert, who was 11, wore a gray suit that fit him very well. Hope, 10, looked lovely in a pink dress with a bow in her hair that gave her a princess-like look. Carmen, 7 years old, was stunning in a white dress and patent leather shoes. The three of them appeared happy because they believed their parents had resolved their problems and that we would once again be a complete family. At 3 p.m., we arrived at the social club. The hall looked beautiful with floral arrangements, round tables dressed in white linens, and decor in shades of pink and white that I had chosen. At the front, there was a special table for us, adorned with red roses and white candles. My parents and siblings were the first to arrive. My mom hugged me tightly and told me how happy she was that Paul and I had sorted out our differences. My daughter commented that marriage always has its ups and downs, but the important thing is that they managed to overcome them together. Then Paul's parents and his entire family arrived. His mom, Mrs. Eulalia, wore an elegant green dress and congratulated me for organizing such a beautiful party. Mary Ellen said to me, "You can tell that you put a lot of love into every detail. Paul is very lucky to have you." At 4 p.m., the clients from the office began to arrive, along with my school teachers, neighbors, and family friends. In total, 180 people showed up, nearly everyone who had been invited. The hall was filling up with elegantly dressed guests, all very happy to be there to celebrate our renewed love. At 4:30, when nearly all the guests were present, I noticed the entrance of Patricia Morrison. She wore a stunning black dress, her hair styled in an elegant bun, and her face showed curiosity and nervousness. Upon seeing her, Paul paled for a moment and nearly dropped the glass he was holding. Patricia approached us very politely and congratulated me on the celebration. "Thank you so much for inviting me," she said. "I'm really glad to see that you've been able to resolve your differences." Paul was so nervous that he struggled to find his words. I acted as if Patricia's presence was completely normal. "I'm glad you could make it," I replied with a smile. I knew how much she would appreciate being with us on this very special day. During the cocktail hour, which lasted about an hour, I moved between the tables, greeting all the guests, ensuring they felt comfortable and chatting with each of them like the ideal host. Paul followed me like a lost puppy, clearly anxious about Patricia's arrival, but unable to say anything that wouldn't make him look suspicious. She sat at a table with some clients from the firm who knew her as Paul's partner. They treated her very casually, asking about her work and her children. From a distance, I watched how she responded to the questions, trying to maintain the facade that she was just a business associate. At 5:30, the event coordinator announced it was time to move to the dining room for dinner. Everyone took their seats at their assigned tables. I had placed Patricia at a table where she could perfectly observe the main table, but far away from Paul, so he couldn't talk to her privately. The menu was extremely elegant. Spinach salad with walnuts, corn cream, beef fillet in mushroom sauce, mashed potatoes, steamed vegetables, and for dessert, a 3-tiered cake that I had specially ordered for this occasion. As we dined, the atmosphere was very cheerful. People were chatting, laughing, and toasting to our happiness. At 7 p.m., after the main course, the moment I had been waiting for over 9 months arrived. I stood up from my chair, took the microphone, and requested everyone's attention. "Dear friends and family," I began, "Paul and I want to express our sincerest gratitude for being here with us on this momentous day. As many of you know, last year, Paul and I went through a significant crisis in our marriage." The audience fell silent, paying attention to my words. Paul smiled at me from his seat, thinking I was going to share a beautiful story about how we overcame our problems during those months. I continued feeling that something was not right in our relationship, although I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. Paul worked long hours, traveled frequently, and came home late. I thought it was just the pressures of work, something normal after so many years of marriage. I spoke for a few minutes about my suspicions, the investigations I had conducted, about the private detective. The audience began to feel uneasy, sensing that I was sharing too intimate details for an event like this. Paul wore a nervous smile as he waited for the moment to share how we had resolved everything. Finally, I declared, "Last March, I discovered the truth, and that truth was far more shocking than I had ever imagined." At that moment, I signaled to the photographer who had brought the prepared photo albums, and he began handing one to each table. "The truth," I said as I opened my own album, "is that during the last 5 years of our marriage, my dear husband Paul has been leading a double life." A murmur of astonishment swept through the hall. Paul stood up, visibly shaken, but I continued speaking. "As you can see in the photographs you're receiving," I mentioned, while showing the first pages of the album, "Paul has been legally married to another woman, Patricia Morrison, since August 1988. With her, he has 2 children, Monica and Paul Jr." The murmur turned into a stir of bewildered voices. People began flipping through the albums, viewing pictures of Paul and Patricia kissing and hugging their children. Patricia got up from her table and tried to leave the hall, but I had asked the club's security staff to prevent anyone from leaving until my presentation was over. "Furthermore," I continued, "as you can see in the documents included in your albums, Paul has been diverting funds from the accounting we built together to support his second family. In total, more than 200,000 pesos, which should have been allocated for the support of our legitimate children." The hall erupted into chaos. People were shouting. Some stood up while others frantically flipped through the photo albums. Paul's parents were devastated. My mother was in tears. The clients from the accounting office were in shock. Paul tried to approach the microphone to snatch it from me, but my brother Robert stepped in and blocked his way. Mary Ellen shouted at me from her table, "This is madness!" But I wasn't finished. I had waited 9 months for this moment and wasn't about to lose the chance to express everything I needed to say. "Dear guests," I continued firmly, "I brought you all together today because I believe you have the right to know the truth about Paul Hernandez, a man who managed to deceive 2 women for years, exploited 5 innocent children, and embezzled money from his own family business." Patricia managed to reach the entrance, but the security staff wouldn't let her leave. She stood there, her face flushed with embarrassment, as everyone present looked at her, fully aware of her role as the other woman in this story. I also pointed directly at Patricia. "I want you to recognize the woman who has been a conscious accomplice to this betrayal all these years, Patricia Morrison, who knew from day one that Paul was married to me and still chose to marry him and have children together. Paul's family was completely stunned. His father, Don Paul, stood up from his chair as if he were about to faint. His mother, Doña Eulalia, began to sob inconsolably. His siblings looked furious but didn't know whether to be angry with me for making this public or with him for committing such a terrible act." The clients in the office were especially troubled, realizing they had been dealing with a man capable of living such a complex double life. Several of them began to murmur among themselves, clearly uneasy about their own financial dealings. On Monday morning, I will formally file the divorce suit for bigamy and fraud. I will also seek restitution of all the money Paul embezzled from our family assets, plus compensation for the years of deceit and humiliation. Paul finally managed to approach me and snatch the microphone away. "Enough!" he exclaimed desperately. "You had no right to do this. This is between us, not for all of them." "You had no right," I replied, reclaiming the microphone. "You had no right to deceive me for 5 years. You had no right to use our children's money to support your other family. You had no right to make me look like a fool in front of everyone who knows us." The photographer captured every moment, every look of shock, every gesture of indignation. I had specifically asked him to capture the reactions of all the attendees because I wanted to document this momentous occasion in its entirety. So at that moment, I addressed all the guests one last time. "You all know the truth about Paul Hernandez. You can decide whether you want to continue being his friends, clients, or family. As for me, my marriage to this man ended 9 months ago, the day I discovered his deceit." I took off the wedding ring I had been wearing during all these months of pretending, and I threw it on the main table. And now, if you'll excuse me, I'm leaving with my children to start the new life that we truly deserve. I took the hands of Robert, Hope, and Carmen and walked toward the exit of the hall. Everyone present remained in complete silence, watching our departure. Behind us, I heard Paul shout my name, but I didn't turn around at all. Upon reaching the parking lot, the kids asked me what had happened, why they yelled at Dad like that, and why everyone seemed so angry. Robert, who was already 11, had partially understood what was going on. "Does Dad have another family?" he asked me. "Yes, son," I replied. "Dad has lied to us for many years, but we're no longer going to live in lies. From now on, we will have an honest life. Just the four of us." That night at home, while the kids slept, I sat in the living room, and for the first time in 9 months, I felt complete peace. I had accomplished something I never thought I was capable of. I had taken total control of a situation where I had been the victim and managed to turn it into my victory. The next day, all the local media echoed the story. "Woman exposes her husband's bigamy at a public celebration," read the newspaper headline. The news spread throughout the city of Leon and then across the state of Guanajuato. Paul Hernandez had become the most notorious man in the region, albeit for the wrong reasons. The days following the celebration were a whirlwind of legal, social, and emotional activity. On Monday, February 17th, just as I promised in my speech, my lawyer officially filed all the lawsuits: divorce for bigamy, fraud, embezzlement, and moral damage. The case generated so much commotion that several national newspapers sent reporters to Leon to cover the story. Paul attempted to contact me throughout that week, but I had already changed the locks on the house and told my children not to answer the phone. Finally, he had to contact me through my lawyer, asking for a meeting to settle things civilly. "Tell your client," I replied to Lawyer Rodriguez, "that there's nothing to resolve. He had 5 years to act with civility and chose to lie to me. Now everything will be settled in court." The community's response was exactly what I had anticipated. The firm's clients began canceling their contracts immediately. No one wanted their accounting affairs managed by a man who had proven to be so dishonest in his personal life. In less than 2 weeks, Paul had lost over 80% of his clientele. The neighbors in our area also started to treat him completely differently. They used to greet him respectfully when they crossed paths with him in the street, but now they pointed and whispered behind his back. The parents of my children's friends approached me to express their support and admiration for the courage with which I handled the situation. At the school where I worked, my colleagues became my most fervent admirers. The principal, Mary Ellen, told me, "You have shown that women of our generation can also be strong and stand up for our rights. You're an example for all of us." But perhaps the most rewarding reaction came from Paul's family. His father, Don Paul, visited me a week after the party. He was a traditional and very religious man, and he was utterly embarrassed by what his son had done. Mary Ellen told me that while sitting in my living room, he said to me, "I want to apologize for Paul's behavior. As his father, I feel I failed to teach him the right values. What he did to you and the children is inexcusable." Doña Eulalia, his mother, also came to visit me several days later, crying uncontrollably as she spoke with me. "Mary Ellen, you were always the perfect daughter-in-law. You took care of my son, gave me 3 wonderful grandchildren, and always showed respect towards us. I don't understand how Paul could do this to you after all that you sacrificed for him." Paul's siblings also came forward to show their support. His sister Sylvia, who had been my classmate back in school and who must have introduced me to Paul, was especially distressed. "If I hadn't brought you to my house that day," she confessed to me, "none of this would have happened. I feel guilty for having introduced you to a man who caused you so much pain." However, the most significant support for me came from my own children. Robert, just 11 years old, understood perfectly what had happened and was proud of me. "Mom," he told me one night before bed, I'm glad you taught Dad that he can't treat women badly. Hope and Carmen took a little longer to fully grasp the situation, but gradually they began to realize that Dad had committed very hurtful acts, and that's why he would no longer be living with us. Will we be okay without Dad? Carmen asked me one afternoon. Yes, sweetheart, I replied. We will be better than ever. As for the legal aspects, everything went as my lawyer had anticipated. In April 1992, the judge annulled the marriage due to bigamy and granted me full custody of the children, along with child support amounting to 40% of Paul's income. The judge also ordered the restitution of all embezzled funds plus interest, which totaled over 280,000 pesos. But what pleased me the most was that the judge determined that Paul would have to pay 100,000 pesos for moral damages. In her ruling, the judge stated that the defendant had caused severe psychological and social harm to the plaintiff through his acts of deliberate and sustained deception over 5 years. Paul appealed the decision, but his lawyers informed him that his chances of winning were nil. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the case had generated such public uproar that no judge would risk being seen as the defender of a bigamist. Patricia Morrison also faced legal repercussions. Although she technically had not engaged in bigamy, as her civil marriage to Paul was valid, she was sued as an accomplice of fraud for having knowingly participated in the embezzlement of funds. She lost her job at the accounting firm where she had found work after the dissolution and was forced to move from Leon due to unbearable social pressure. In May 1992, 3 months after the celebration, Paul visited me for the last time. He looked haggard. He had lost a lot of weight, and his dark circles showed that he hadn't slept well. He wanted to talk to me without the intervention of lawyers to clarify what was between us. Mary Ellen confessed to me while sitting in the same armchair where she had revealed the truth about her double life months earlier. I acknowledged that what I did was very wrong. However, it was necessary for her to experience that public humiliation. You could have started the divorce process without creating such a spectacle. I looked him in the eyes, and for the first time in so many years, I felt neither love nor hatred for him, only a deep indifference, as if he were just a stranger. Paul, I replied, you humiliated me for 5 years every time you lied to my face. Every time you came home smelling of another perfume, every time you used our children's money to support your other family, every moment you made me feel like a paranoid for suspecting you. One night of public humiliation does not compare to 5 years of private humiliation. He remained silent for quite a while. Then he asked me if there was any possibility that I could forgive him at some point, not to get back together, but to establish a civilized relationship for the sake of the children. The kids can have whatever relationship they want with you, I said. That decision is up to them, not me. But between you and me, there's nothing left. To me, you are just the father of my children, nothing more. You will never be relevant in my life in any other way. That was the last time we had a personal conversation. After that, all communication between us was conducted through our lawyers or was limited exclusively to the children. However, the most significant part of this process was how it transformed my perception of myself. For 35 years of my life, I had been the obedient daughter, the diligent student, the submissive wife, the self-sacrificing mother. I always prioritized others' needs over my own. Planning and executing that revenge taught me that I was much stronger, smarter, and more capable than I had ever believed throughout my life. It taught me that I could take control of the most complicated situations and turn them to my advantage. It taught me that I didn't have to be a victim of other people's choices. The rest of 1992 became a period of complete reconstruction of my life. With the money I received from the legal settlement and the sale of my share of the accounting firm, I managed to buy a new house in a better neighborhood where my children and I could start fresh, free from the painful memories of our previous home. The house I chose was located in Jardín del Moral, a quiet and safe neighborhood with good schools nearby. It was smaller than the home we had lived in with Paul, but it was completely ours. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a spacious kitchen overlooking the garden, and most importantly, no traces of the past. The kids adapted surprisingly well to the change. Robert started middle school at a new school where no one knew our family history. He was a very bright boy and mature for his age, and he quickly made new friends. His teachers told me he was an exemplary student, responsible and respectful. Hope, who was 11, initially missed her dad more than the other 2, but gradually she began to enjoy the emotional stability our new life offered. There were no more fights at home, no constant tension, no lies. "Mom," she told me one afternoon, "I like our new house better because you're always happy here." Carmen, the youngest at 8 years old, adapted faster than anyone. Kids at that age are very resilient, and for her, the new house became her regular home. She started taking piano lessons at a nearby academy and showed great musical talent. As for my job, I received a promotion at the elementary school where I taught. The principal appointed me academic coordinator, a position that involved more responsibilities but also better pay and greater prestige. Mary Ellen told me when she offered me the role, "You have shown very strong character and outstanding leadership ability. We believe you can contribute significantly to the growth of our institution." I also started studying in the afternoons. I enrolled in a master's program in education at the University of Lyon. I had always wanted to continue my studies, but the responsibilities of marriage and home had held me back. Now, with the kids older and more independent, I could finally pursue my own academic goals. Weekends became genuine quality time with my children. We went to the movies, visited museums, and had picnics in the park. Sunday mornings were a joy as we enjoyed breakfast in bed while watching cartoons on TV. These were simple moments, but they were filled with a genuine happiness I hadn't experienced in years. I also started reconnecting with friends I had neglected during the tough years of my marriage. My friend Rose, with whom I shared a room in college, lived in Guadalajara, and we began to visit each other regularly. She was also divorced, and we supported each other through this new phase of our lives. During one of her visits, Mary Ellen remarked to Rose, "You seem happier now than I've ever seen you during all the years you were married. It's as if you found the person you were before you met Paul." And she was right. During my years of marriage, especially in the last 5, filled with lies and tension, I had lost many aspects of my personality. I had stopped laughing wholeheartedly. I had ceased to dream about the future or feel curiosity about the world. Now, all those parts of me were coming back. In December 1992, a year after I began planning my revenge, I received an invitation I never would have imagined. The University of Lyon extended an invitation for me to give a talk on female empowerment and rebuilding life after divorce on International Women's Day. Mrs. Hernandez, the event coordinator, mentioned to me when she called, "Your story has become quite well known throughout the region, and we believe your experience could inspire many women going through similar situations." At first, I felt a great shyness at the thought of publicly speaking about something so personal. But then I realized that if my experience could help others find the strength to assert their rights, it was worth it. The talk took place in March 1993 in the main auditorium of the university. Over 300 women attended, homemakers, students, professionals, older women, and recent high school graduates. They were all eager to hear from me firsthand how I managed to move forward after such a painful betrayal. For an hour and a half, I shared my entire story, from the day I met Paul to the party in February 1992. But the most important part was when I spoke about the internal journey I went through to transform myself from a victim into the protagonist of my own story. "Friends," I explained at the end of my talk, "for many years, I believed that my worth as a woman depended on having a husband and maintaining a marriage. I thought my duty was to serve others and always put my needs aside. However, discovering the betrayal by Paul taught me that I could be strong, intelligent, and brave on my own. The response from the women was overwhelming. Many approached me afterward to share their own stories: unfaithful husbands, domestic violence, economic abandonment, workplace discrimination, but also to tell me how my example had encouraged them to make meaningful decisions in their lives. A woman around 45 years old approached me in tears. "Mary Ellen," she said, "I've suspected for 15 years that my husband is cheating on me, but I never dared to investigate for fear of being left alone. After hearing you, I realized that living in falsehood is more painful than confronting reality." A young woman of about 25 came up to me and shared that she had been enduring abuse from her partner because she believed it was normal in relationships. "You taught me that I deserve respect," she said, "and that I shouldn't accept someone treating me badly." The experience of giving the lecture made me realize that I had found a new vocation. In addition to being a teacher to children, I could teach adult women who needed to learn to value and defend themselves. In 1993, I started receiving invitations to give talks in various organizations, church groups, community associations, women's professional clubs, and neighborhood centers. Every time I shared my story, I noticed how the women present began to reflect on their own lives and relationships. That same year, something unexpected happened. I started receiving letters from women in other states who had read about my experience in newspapers or magazines. Women from Jalisco, Michoacán, Aguascalientes, and Zacatecas wrote to me to share their own experiences and ask for guidance. One letter that arrived from Morelia deeply impacted me. It was from a teacher like me, 42 years old, who discovered that her husband was maintaining another family in Uruapan. Mrs. Mary Ellen wrote to me. When I read her story in the newspaper, I felt like someone had truly captured what I was going through. Her situation inspired me to hire a detective and confront my husband. Now I'm in the process of getting a divorce, and for the first time in years, I feel at peace with myself. These letters brought me profound satisfaction. My revenge on Paul had originally been something personal, fueled by anger and pain, but without intending to, it transformed into something more significant, a guide for other women on how to regain control in situations where they have been victims. As for Paul, during 1993, I didn't hear much from him. The kids visited him every 2 weeks, as mandated by the judge, but they rarely shared details about those visits. Through third-party comments, I learned that he had permanently closed his office, found work as an employee at an accounting firm, and that his relationship with Patricia ended after the public scandal. One time, Robert mentioned to me that Dad had moved to a small apartment near downtown Leon, and that he seemed very sad when they visited him. "Do you feel sorry for your dad?" I asked him. "A little," he replied. "But I also understand why you did what you did. He deceived us all for a long time." In December 1993, marking 2 years since I began my revenge, I reflected on all that had changed in my life. I had a home I loved, a job that fulfilled me. I was pursuing a master's degree. My kids were healthy and happy. I had discovered a new vocation in helping other women, and for the first time in many years, I felt completely in control of my future. But the most significant thing was that I had regained something I hadn't realized I had lost: self-respect. During the years of marriage, I had accepted being deceived, ignored, and undervalued without understanding that I deserved better. Now, I was entirely sure that I would never again allow anyone to treat me that way. In January 1994, I met someone who would wonderfully transform this new phase of my life. His name was Frank Reyes. He was a widower, 50 years old, and worked as an engineer at a construction company. I met him at a parents' meeting at Roberts High School. Fernando was completely different from Paul. He was a calm, sincere man who spoke in a moderate tone, but always with honesty. He had lost his wife in a car accident 3 years prior and was raising his son James alone, who was the same age as Robert and had become a good friend of his. At first, our conversations revolved around our children and school activities, but gradually we began to have deeper discussions. He knew who I was. My story had been so public that most people in Leon were aware of it, but he never asked me uncomfortable questions or treated me like a curiosity. One afternoon, while we were both waiting for our children after a soccer game, Mary Ellen told me, "I really admire how you've managed to support your family after everything that happened. James and I have also had to learn to live alone, and I know how difficult it can be." Over several months, we forged a beautiful friendship. Fernando would invite me and my children over for lunch on Sundays at his house, where he prepared delicious stews he had learned to make after becoming a widower. I invited them over for dinner at my place, and we enjoyed long chats about everything: work, children, future plans, and books we had read. It was a relationship entirely different from what I had with Paul. With Fernando, there was no drama, no intense passions, nor extravagant promises, but there was something much more valuable: peace, mutual respect, and a genuine connection where we could both be completely ourselves. In July 1994, Fernando formally asked me if we could be a couple. Mary Ellen told me one night after dinner while the kids were watching television, "I've been thinking a lot about us. I believe we could develop a beautiful relationship if you agree." I replied that I was open to it, but I also made it clear that I needed to take things slow. "Fernando, I'm no longer the naive young woman who married at 22 with fairy tale dreams. I now understand that relationships require effort, honesty, and mutual respect. If we're going to build something together, it has to be on solid foundations." He understood immediately. Mary Ellen replied that she also didn't want drama or overwhelming emotions. She was looking for a life partner, someone with whom she could enjoy the years ahead in a serene and happy way. The next 2 years, from 1994 to 1996, were the calmest and most fulfilling I had experienced in a long time. My relationship with Fernando grew gradually, based on respect, trust, and genuine affection. He never tried to rush me into marriage or hasty decisions. He understood that I needed time to fully trust someone again. Our children got along wonderfully. Robert and James had become the best of friends. Hope adored Fernando, as he always treated her like a little princess, and Carmen had found in James the big brother she had never had. Together we formed a beautiful family, even though we didn't share the same home. In 1995, I completed my master's degree in education with a thesis on women's empowerment through adult education. My research was based on all the talks I had given and the letters I received from women who found the strength to transform their lives after hearing my story. On my graduation day, Fernando and my 4 children were in the front row of the auditorium, applauding as I received my diploma. "Mom," said Robert, who was already 15 years old, "I'm so proud of you. You're the strongest woman I know." Also in 1995, I received a very interesting proposal. A publishing house from Mexico City reached out to offer me the chance to write a book about my experience. "Mrs. Garcia," the editor said over the phone, "we believe your story could be a great help for thousands of women across the country. Would you be willing to write an autobiography?" The proposal filled me with excitement. Writing a book meant I could reach women in every corner of Mexico, not just those who could attend my talks. I spent half a year writing Never Is Too Late to Start Again, the story of a woman who reclaimed her life. The book was released in March 1996 and was received fantastically. In the first 6 months, over 50,000 copies were sold. I received countless letters from readers all over the country, from Tijuana to Merida, and from women aged 20 to 70. They all shared how my story had been a source of inspiration for them. The letter that touched me the most was from a 19-year-old young woman from Oaxaca. Mary Ellen wrote to me, "I read your book and decided not to marry my boyfriend who mistreated me and made me feel worthless. Thanks to your example, I understood that I deserve respect and that I can move forward on my own. Now I'm studying nursing and I feel proud of myself." In August 1996, Fernando and I decided to get married, but this time it would be completely different from my first marriage. Firstly, we both entered the relationship as mature adults who knew exactly what we wanted and what we would not tolerate. Secondly, our relationship had been built gradually, without rushing or unrealistic romantic fantasies. We had a simple wedding in my backyard, with just our families and closest friends. I wore a light blue dress, not white, because I was no longer a young bride full of dreams. I was a 39-year-old woman who had lived a lot and knew exactly what kind of marriage I wanted. Fernando promised to always respect me as the independent and strong woman I am, to support my dreams and personal goals, and never to try to change or control me. I promised to be his loyal and sincere partner, to share both joys and challenges with him, and to build a life together based on mutual trust. After the ceremony, our 5 children, because James had also become like a son to me, embraced us and expressed their happiness at seeing us officially become a family. The vows we exchanged were quite different from the traditional ones. Mom, Hope, who was already 15, told me, "I'm so glad to see you happy again." Our honeymoon consisted of a road trip through central Mexico, visiting places like Guanajuato, San Miguel de Allende, Querétaro, and San Luis Potosí. We traveled slowly, stopping in charming little towns that caught our interest, exploring museums and tasting food at local eateries. It was exactly the type of trip I enjoyed. No rush, no strict itineraries, savoring every moment. "Mary Ellen," Fernando said to me one night while we were having dinner in a restaurant in Zacatecas, "I never thought that at my age I would find such an ideal partner for me. You are just the woman I needed at this stage of my life." And I shared that feeling. Fernando wasn't the great passionate love of my youth, but he represented something much more valuable, a mature, stable, and honest partner who deeply respected me and with whom I envisioned growing old in peace. Upon returning from our honeymoon, we began the exciting task of merging our 2 families under one roof. We bought a larger house in the La Martinica neighborhood, with 5 bedrooms so that each child could have their own space. Surprisingly, the transition turned out to be quite smooth, as we had all learned to coexist gradually during our 2 years of dating. In December 1996, after wrapping up a year that had been transformative in so many ways, I took a moment to reflect on the journey I had taken since that anguishing night in February 1991, when I discovered the truth about Paul. He is an upright man who has never faced legal or personal problems because he understood from a young age that honesty is the foundation of true success. Regarding Paul, I found out that he passed away 5 years ago from a heart attack. The children attended his funeral, but I didn't. To me, Paul had ceased to exist long before. The moment I decided to reveal his lies, I never felt resentment towards him again. Though I didn't fully forgive him either, he simply became a part of my history that no longer held any power over my present life. Patricia moved away from Leon after the scandal, and since then I haven't heard from her. Her children with Paul grew up, and I suppose they formed their own families, but reconnecting was never part of our plans. It was the most convenient choice. Some wounds heal better when the people involved choose completely different paths. My book, It's Never Too Late to Start Over, has been reprinted more than 20 times and has reached audiences throughout Latin America. Every week, I receive letters from women who tell me how my story has inspired them to make meaningful decisions in their lives. Those letters are my greatest treasure. Over these 30 years, I have given over 500 talks at universities, women's organizations, community centers, and businesses. My message has remained consistent. Women deserve to be respected, valued, and treated with dignity. And when that doesn't happen, we possess the strength and intelligence necessary to change our circumstances. I have witnessed how Mexico has evolved over the years. Today, women have more opportunities, legal rights, and social support when facing issues in their marriages. However, there is still a long way to go. There are still women who endure abuse because they believe they have no options. There are those who prioritize the needs of others over their own throughout their lives. To all those women, I want to convey the same message I have been sharing for 30 years. He is a man of integrity who has never faced legal or personal problems, as he understood from a young age that honesty is the key to genuine success. Regarding Paul, I learned that he passed away 5 years ago from a heart attack. The kids attended his funeral, but I did not. To me, Paul had ceased to exist long before that. The moment I decided to expose his lies, I never felt resentment towards him again, although I did not grant him complete forgiveness. He simply became part of my past that no longer influenced my present. Patricia moved away from Leon after the scandal, and I never heard from her again. Her children with Paul have grown up and I assume started their own families, but we were never in contact. It was better that way. Some wounds heal more effectively when the people involved take completely different paths. My book, It's Never Too Late to Start Over, has been reprinted over 20 times and distributed throughout Latin America. I receive letters every week from women who share how my story has motivated them to make meaningful decisions in their lives. Those letters are my most cherished treasure. Throughout these 30 years, I have participated in over 500 conferences at universities, women's organizations, community centers, and businesses. My message has remained consistent. Women deserve to be respected, valued, and treated with dignity. And when that doesn't happen, we have the strength and intelligence needed to transform our situation. I have observed how Mexico has significantly evolved during these years. Women today have more opportunities, legal rights, and social support when facing marital conflicts. Yet, there is still a long way to go. There are still women who tolerate abuse because they believe they have no alternatives. There are still women who prioritize the needs of others over their own throughout their lives. To all those women, I want to convey the same message I've shared for 30 years. You hold great value, deserve respect, and possess the strength to transform any circumstances that bring you unhappiness. It doesn't matter how old you are, whether you are 25 or 65. It doesn't matter if you have young children or grandchildren. Financial situations should not be an obstacle. There is always a way to elevate your quality of life if you dare to take action. The revenge I plotted against Paul was not solely about him. It was about me. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my self-esteem, and my personal power. It was an act to prove to myself that I was not a powerless victim, but a woman capable of taking control of her destiny. Each of you harbors that same capacity within you. You might not need to seek public vengeance as I did. Your circumstances may require a different approach, but all of you possess the intelligence, strength, and right to claim a more fulfilling life. If there's one thing I've learned in my 68 years of life, it's that it's never too late to start anew. It doesn't matter how long you've been trapped in a relationship that hasn't served you well, or how many times you've put others' needs before your own. It doesn't matter how many times you felt unworthy of something better. Today can mark the beginning of a new chapter in your lives. Today, you can decide that you deserve to value yourself, respect yourself, and stand up for yourselves. Today, you can start forging the life you truly desire. And if anyone tries to make you feel like you're too old to change, that it's too late to restart, or that you should just accept what you have, think of Mary Ellen Garcia, a teacher from a small town in Guanajuato, who at 35 decided to seek something better and had the courage to go after it. Dear ones, this has been my story. A narrative of suffering, but also of triumph. A tale of betrayal, but also of justice. A story of humiliation, but also of restored dignity. I'm grateful that you've accompanied me on this journey in my memoirs. I hope what I've shared serves you, whether to make meaningful decisions in your lives or to support a woman in your family who is going through a tough time. Never forget that you have worth, that you deserve respect, and that there is always an opportunity to start anew. If you enjoyed my story, I would appreciate a like, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment on where in Mexico you're tuning in from. I'm glad to know my message is reaching all parts of our beautiful country. And remember, it's never too late to restart. May God bless you all, and until the next story,